Hello, my name is Mike DiPaolo, and I'm the Vice President for Philanthropy and Southern Delaware at the Delaware Community Foundation. I'm here today with someone I really respect and had an opportunity to hear just last month in Phoenix at the EdNet conference, and that's Dr. Russell James, professor at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas, who specializes in research in charitable giving, especially charitable estate planning and behavioral and neuroeconomics. He offers a lot of free advice and materials for fundraisers and advisors on his website, encouragegenerosity.com. Welcome, Dr. James.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Today, we're going to talk specifically about what financial advisors need to know about planned giving. So let's start with the basics. What approaches do you recommend for financial advisors looking to grow their practice through charitable estate planning?
Well, I think we start with the basic idea that we want to provide value for clients. So, how can we provide that value? By adding a little bit of charitable knowledge to our regular financial planning knowledge. Well, some of the first things we start with is to understand, for example, that appreciated asset gifts give a double tax benefit. If I write a check, I get a tax deduction. Maybe I can use it, maybe I can't. But if I make that same gift from appreciated assets, if I've held the asset for more than a year, I not only get a tax deduction of the same size, but I also get to avoid that capital gains tax. So that's an example of how we want to have these larger conversations related to giving beyond just writing a check. There's other examples as well. So, for example, let's say you propose that, and a client says, "Well, yeah, that's a good idea, and I do have those shares of Apple stock that have gone up in value, but I don't really want to sell those shares now. The market's being kind of weird." Well, the proper response to that is to say, "Oh no, you don't need to change your portfolio at all. You just take that cash that you're getting ready to give to the charity." Instead of giving it to the charity, use it to buy brand new shares of Apple stock. Then send those old shares of Apple stock to the charity. You haven't changed your portfolio at all, but you've wiped out all that capital gain. So that's an example where we can provide value to the clients through charitable planning. I mean, other examples, we know that any of that IRA, 401k money that ends up going to family members, they're going to have to pay income taxes on that. And now with the new IRS rules, they're going to have to start paying those even faster. But any of that money that goes to charity, there's no income taxes on it. So if you've got a client and they've already have charitable interests and you've asked them about their charitable interests in leaving a legacy in their estate plan, well, those are the very first dollars that we want to transfer to the charity in the estate plan is the qualified plan money. Well, we could go on the various strategies, but I will point out that many charitable planning strategies allow for an actual increase in assets under management. Now, how is this possible? Well, it's possible because we can shift money over to these protected structures, like, say, a donor advised fund. If we put money into a donor advised fund, it grows tax free until it's distributed out. Or let's say we have a highly appreciated asset, we can put that into a charitable remainder trust, sell that asset with no upfront capital gains tax. That means we're still managing the entire amount. And that generates payments for the client every year for the client's life or perhaps client and client spouse's life. So those are just some examples of how we can get into this world of charitable planning that not only provide value to the clients, but also can be financially profitable for the advisors.
Right on, spot on. And one thing that I think about is for the clients we work with, the fund holders we work with, is that, for their giving, it has to be, they have to have the assets, right? Preferably and then most advantageously to them, the appreciated asset. It has to be the right time. Timing is really important, but they have to have that charitable inclination, right? And I know that you have some very interesting insights into the psychology of giving, the psychology of planned giving based on neuroimaging especially from that presentation that I saw. What do you think are some of the best ways to engage generosity and encourage generosity among planned giving donors based on your research?
So, in many ways, it's similar to what advisors do in other spaces. Let's say we were engaging and advising on retirement planning. Well, we might start with what are your goals? Like, what kind of an income do you want to have over what period of time? And when do you want to retire? And then once we have those goals, we kind of work back. Well, we could do the same thing with charitable goals. To do that, though, we need to ask these broader questions. We might think of it as helping the donor to define their personally meaningful philanthropic victory. So we can ask questions like, what's the most meaningful thing that you could do with your money beyond providing for your family? Or we could ask questions about what kind of an impact would you like to leave on the world beyond just your own personal consumption? When we have these kinds of conversations, asking about, are there any causes that have been important in your life? Well, when we ask those questions, it then helps the client to start thinking about their life story and what causes have been important in their life. Those are often the same causes that they would like to make an impact in as well. So when we start talking about those kinds of goals, then we go through that same process, understanding this is the impact that the client really wants to make. This is the area they want to make it in. Then we can start thinking through what strategies and structures and possibilities will help them fulfill those philanthropic desires. The cool thing about having those bigger, broader conversations is that it actually helps connect with our clients on a more lasting and personal front rather than just, hey, we beat the S&P 500 by 3 basis points this quarter, right? The idea being that when we connect with them at that deeper level, those clients are going to tend to stay with us for a longer period of time, even if the market gets wonky or their particular portfolio is temporarily wonky, because they know that we're looking at that broader goal for them, not just, hey, I'm maximizing your return compared to any other alternative. So that's what I would suggest. Begin with these broader conversations about what kind of an impact they would like to make. Have there been any causes that have been personally meaningful to them in their lives? And then work backwards from the kind of impact they would like to make to the actual structures and plans that make that happen.
Wonderful. Now, I know I've heard you mention a hidden code of sorts, influencing end-of-life decisions, particularly in the context of planned giving. What do you mean by that, and how should that shape the way financial advisors approach those kind of conversations with their clients?
So, believe it or not, there's actually an entire field of experimental psychology that's devoted to the question of how does it change people's values and preferences when you remind them that they're going to die? I kid you not. It's actually called terror management theory. And no, I didn't make that up. That is what it's really called. But because of that, we have literally hundreds and hundreds of experimental results that show essentially people tend to have they tend to have a couple of different reactions to these death reminders. One reaction for most people most of the time is avoidance, like I want to stay away from that reminder, don't remind me that I'm going to die. The second is this second stage response, which is, okay, I admit it, I'm going to disappear, but I want to make an impact that is going to live beyond me. It's actually called the pursuit of symbolic immortality. Now, what this has to do with practical reality is if we want to talk to a client about death planning, whether that's estate planning or a bet on when they're going to die, what we call an annuity, or life insurance, another bet on when you're going to die, the reaction of most people most of the time is going to be avoidance. Oh, yeah, let's do that next time. Or I'm a little too busy to deal with that. So, because of that, we need to come up with ways of sidestepping a bit of that avoidance response. So, this is kind of the spoonful of sugar that makes the medicine go down, right? Let's say, well, we want to talk about, say, asset protection. So that's going to involve protection from lawsuits, but also protection from, let's say, estate taxes or income taxes on estate transfers of qualified plan money. So we begin with a topic that's not death related. as a way to then get into some of these other planning topics, trying to sidestep that avoidance response. The other approach is once we're into the estate planning or other kinds of end of life planning, we focus on outcomes with permanence. So the example might be, well, we don't have to put any instructions with this estate, but there's a chance that the whole thing is just going to be spent very rapidly. Honestly, we just had a brand new publication that showed that 41% of heirs have had their net worth go back to or below where it started within 12 months of receiving the inheritance. Well, that suggests that we want to put some instructions with the money, some instructions that will make a more lasting impact, an impact that reflects my life story and values. So now we're shifting from we've moved beyond the avoidance response. We instead are trying to make that lasting social impact. We're going to do that by putting some instructions with the money. What do we want it to accomplish? How long do we want it to be there? Do we want to just all transfer it in one big lump sum at death? Or do we actually want to spread it out over time, maybe giving the heirs more than one shot at their inheritance? And so those are some examples of how we can use that underlying psychological reality. We're dealing with avoidance, we're dealing with this desire for permanence, and we can use that in the way that we approach those communications.
So these next two questions kind of take off from that point. And the first one that we've been thinking about is that sometimes younger generations critique baby boomers. We've all heard it, right? Okay, boomer, and all the critiques that come with uh, or towards that generation, warranted or not, mostly probably not warranted. Yet this demographic accounts for approximately 43% of all philanthropic contributions. How should financial advisors tailor their approach to engage baby boomers and all generations effectively in planned giving?
Well, let me come back to those same two basic responses that we get when we are reminding people of their own mortality. And again, this is what happens in estate planning. Hey, quick side note, a lot of times advisors don't realize this because when advisors are talking about estate planning, they're not talking about their own death. This emotional reaction comes when we're thinking about our own death, and that's the client's experience, even though it may not be the advisor's experience. So as people age, we have those same two factors, but gradually some share of people will shift from that avoidance response of, I don't want to deal with it, to the pursuit of symbolic immortality, the desire to make a permanent impact. So as we're looking at those who are becoming older, for some, it just becomes more difficult to be stuck in that avoidance stage, right? Things happen to their friends who pass away or their heroes who pass away, famous people. And so it becomes more and more a reality that they can't just avoid. So then we start talking about permanence in terms of structures. So let me give you an example of this. Back when our exemption levels were lower, so we could see all of the estates that were, say, over $2 million, when we look at philanthropic estate gifts, that is charitable estate gifts, that for estates of, say, $5 million or above, around 73 to 76% of those charitable estate dollars, they actually go to private family foundations, at least before the rise of the donor advised funds that we've been seeing recently. A big chunk of that, say 20% that don't, they actually go to similar structures, maybe at a university that's an endowed professorship or scholarship or other types of endowments at community foundations. The whole point here is to understand what is that underlying psychological attraction. It's to create something with permanence that reflects my identity, my life story. And so when we are trying to tailor that approach, understand that we need to start having conversations about impact with permanence, working with the community foundation to say, oh, how can we set up something for this high capacity client that would live beyond them, but still reflect their values in a way that would provide some of that lasting impact, lasting meaning for the client. So again, we're dealing with those same two basic reactions, and we can get creative about how we can sidestep the avoidance response to get into the estate planning conversation and then lean into that desire for permanence once we start having that conversation.
To me, the natural progression of this conversation is we've been talking about the client and their needs and tax beneficial situations for them, for making sure that there's a vehicle for the permanence of their vision and mission. Uh, and the group that we're starting to talk about now is the people who are inheriting that vision, right? Whether it's
Mhm.
literally their children or their grandchildren who may have a family foundation or who may choose to put their money in a donor advised fund and have succeeding generations manage the grants from that fund or from that charity. Um, and a lot of times, and I'm sure you've seen this, I know I've seen this, is that oftentimes people aren't ready. They haven't been exposed to it. There's a tendency for older generations to hold on to it. And sometimes they're not even willing to be stewards of that legacy. Um, Sometimes they may even question the uses that it was used for before. There are definitely generational differences. They may want to explore different charities, different areas of interest. How can advisors bridge that gap between the beneficiary, and I guess this time I'm thinking of the beneficiary as those who are inheriting the responsibility to use this money and any existing mission that the founding generation may have imposed upon it or thought that saw the fund going in a certain direction.
Yeah, so there is, in fact, some very cool research about, for example, what happens to private foundations when the founder dies. Here's a couple of things that happen. Number one, those individual charities that the founder had a connection with. So up to the point of death, it was all going to this charity because that was the founder's connection. That basically ends. Those relationships don't continue. The other thing that we see is that the amount of charitable distributions drop, the amount of administrative expenses increase, and the kinds of charities that are selected change dramatically. And they change in this way. The decision-making process when the founder is still alive for a private family foundation, it might have the structure of a group decision, but let's be honest, it's not a group decision. The founder says, let's do this, and there's a bunch of people expecting an inheritance around the table, so they all nod their heads, right? Once that founder is gone, we go from an individual decision-making process to this true group decision-making process. What happens? What happens is you only get these kinds of broadly acceptable, bland kind of everybody's reasonably happy with it sort of charitable projects and outcomes. So one side note of that is that essentially giving to religious organizations completely craters at the death of the founder. Why? Because not everybody around the table is going to agree on that, right? So there is this like dramatic shift in what is happening. So what I would say is go back to the person who's doing the planning and say, is this what you want to have happen? Right? And if it's not, let's start planning for that. What we need to do is to get the original generation out of this kind of Pollyannish view of, oh, it's all going to work out, it'll all be happy, and instead saying, this is what normally happens, right? To an inheritance. This is what normally happens to philanthropic funds. Is that what you want? Now, if it's not, there's two different strategies. And I'm going to give my snarky lawyer view on this. Okay. One strategy is we have a big meeting, we talk about values, and we create a mission statement. We hold hands, we sing Kumbaya, and that fixes everything. My view of that is you got a bunch of people expecting an inheritance, so you're going to get a bunch of head nodding. And that has absolutely nothing to do with the actual postmortem behavior. By the way, there's another reason for that. Postmortem behavior is massively different because it's not just money, it's death money. And people behave differently with death money. So, for example, I was mentioning the new research that just came out that we had published from a nationally representative study. It found that 41% of heirs spend the entire inheritance within about 12 months. They actually spend that money faster. They're more likely to spend the entire thing faster than any other kind of financial windfall. Why is that? Go back to that same psychological concept. This is the avoidance response to the death money. This isn't just normal money. This is your money from your mom's death. It's your sack of mom death money. Hey, I noticed you still had some of your mom death money in your account. What do you want to do with that money from your mom dying? Well, psychologically, the avoidance response is we want to get rid of it, right? So that's what we see with a large share of people in how they treat that kind of money. I just mentioned that to point out that we need to put the instructions with the money to make sure that those clients' goals are going to actually be delivered. I'm a lawyer. I'm much more about, hey, let's just create the structures to guarantee it's going to go to the places and the individual causes that I, as the wealth holder, care about, right? Rather than the, oh, it will all work out, a school of thought. So that's, I'm saying bridge the gap by creating legal structures that make it happen the way you want to make it happen. Others would say, no, we can do that by just having conversations of getting together, and then we can all agree on things. I guess it's probably because of my many years spent in probate litigation. I know just how nasty these family affairs can get when people are fighting over money. I'm more in the category of saying, put the instructions with the money. If you don't put the instructions with the money, then probably what's going to happen isn't going to fit what your desires are.
Yeah. I, I agree in the sense that the conversations are very important. And the earlier you can get to those, the better. The more people involved, the better. But it's not just one sit down. It's multiple times um, to meet with a family, to sit down. But at the community foundation, I've often seen that the founders of a donor advised fund will will instruct us that upon their death, their fund truly becomes permanently endowed, that they can only use a certain percentage distribution. And it's often sometimes for the reasons that you mentioned, that they want to make sure that this is truly a family legacy, that it's not going to go out the door right away, that it's not going to um, go to, they don't necessarily put organizational restrictions on it, but they want to be able to pass down a family legacy. And the only way to truly do that is to put those restrictions on it. So that each generation, each succeeding generation has an opportunity to fund the causes that matter and to fund the causes that are relevant at their time, right? 50 years from now, we don't know what's going to happen. So it's important to have that asset stick around for succeeding generations to use and to celebrate and to remember the founder of that fund too, or of that organization. That's equally as important too. Well, Professor James, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us from lovely Lubbock, Texas, and Texas Tech University. And again, we really appreciate all that you do for the field and for taking a few minutes to join us here in Delaware today.
Happy to do it. Thanks so much, Mike.